Welcome to the Bible Forum. I'm Warren Sprouse. It's Sunday, March 22nd. A cool, rainy Sunday night here in Charleston, South Carolina. I hope you are well wherever you may be. We are battling the coronavirus as we speak. Just before we went on the air, I read how that Senate Majority Leader McConnell led a meeting this morning with Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. They were trying to hammer out the sticking points in this bill they want passed. The Democrats apparently left the meeting protesting that the bill is a corporate slush fund that doesn't do enough to protect workers from layoffs. We're talking about that financial bill that's going to theoretically give every taxpayer $1,200. Democrats says it gives the Treasury too much power to make its own decisions and doesn't provide any money for state and local governments, along with some other complaints that they had. After a series of additional talks, the cloture vote failed along party lines, 47 to 47, forcing the group back to the negotiating table. They're going to keep playing this game while people are struggling, while people are continuing to die. It's called politics. We're fighting this battle of the COVID-19, and we're being told by the medical profession that COVID-19 is a very different animal. They're telling us you may or may not have a runny nose and fever, that you may have a sore throat that becomes a major common finding, then gets into the lungs. A dry, non-productive cough is very common, followed or accompanied by shortness of breath. The shortness of breath is what's triggering the hospital visits, and folks are presenting to the hospital showing low oxygen levels, oxygen saturations, and chest imaging typically shows a bilateral diffuse pneumonia. That's a double pneumonia for the rest of us out here in non-doctor land. The only proven effective therapies so far have proven to be supportive. They give oxygen treatments, positive pressure ventilation, either with a CPAP or a BiPAP machine, or with a mechanical ventilator attached to a breathing tube. At this point, there is no cure. Your body has to fight it off. It has to run its course. If your body is weak, if you have a tendency to get colds in your chest and pneumonias and things like that, you're probably going to have a rough time of it. Be careful. Stay out of other people's way. There is no Tamiflu equivalent that works for this disease. There are some smart medical folks out there that are spitballing ideas around, but nothing is proven to work. So like every other viral illness that you've probably ever gotten, you have to ride it out and hope your body is strong enough to fight it off. An outfit out in California just late this afternoon, early this evening, is telling us they have something that will help. It's in California. It's going to take a few days to get it out. And it will go to the medical profession, and it has to do with a quicker way of learning whether you have it or not. Babies and children are making out fairly okay, even if they test positive. They haven't been dying of it in China or in Italy. There have been children who have died, but generally speaking, it's not working that way. Healthy young adults, athletic types in their 30s to 50s are coming in very sick, and some are dying. And from there, the older ones are experiencing the higher hospitalization rates and mortality rates. It's a vicious thing, and it's ravaging the entire world. The Blaze.com reports that Chinese whistleblowers tell Cakes In, a media group focused on financial and business news, that if they, meaning the Chinese, are working to create an appearance that things are back to normal when they're not. Civil servants are saying that businesses are actually faking the numbers. For example, according to one civil servant, Beijing had started checking Zhejiang businesses' electricity consumption levels. So district officials ordered the companies to start leaving their lights and machinery on all day to drive up those numbers. Businesses have reportedly falsified staff attendance logs as well. According to them, they, quote, would rather waste a small amount of money on power than irritate local officials. The number of reported coronavirus cases worldwide has now surpassed the number in China, and Italy alone has more reported deaths than China, despite having nearly 40,000 fewer reported cases. In all of this, there is a new threat on the World Wide Web. The government is planning to scan online messages, apparently. A privacy organization is warning that a bill making its way in Congress would violate privacy and security by requiring every message sent to be read by government-approved scanning software. It's called the Electronic Frontier Foundation. It's an Earn It bill, whatever that means, sponsored by Senators Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal. He's a Democrat from Kentucky. Graham's a Republican from here, South Carolina. These folks say that such a bill would spell the end of encryption online. The bill's authors avoided the word encryption, but they have proposed, quote, legislation that enables an all-out assault on encryption. They say it would create a 19-person commission that's completely controlled by the Attorney General and law enforcement agencies. And at the hearing, the Vice President at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children made it clear what he wants the best practices to be. They believe online services should be made to screen messages for material that the NCMEC considers abusive. They want to use screening technology that's been approved by the NCMEC and law enforcement, and to report what they find in the messages back to this agency, and be held legally responsible for the content of messages that have been sent by others. Now, all that sounds very protective, and at the same time, it sounds very intrusive. The objective appears to be an internet where the law requires every message sent to be read by government-approved scanning software. Companies that handle such messages wouldn't be allowed to securely encrypt them, or they lose legal protections that allow them to operate. Can you see it coming? We are now in a global threat situation. An all-out effort is being made to stop that threat and protect people. To do that, the government steps in to monitor every transmission for your own good. I can see the computer lights going dim and the jackboots at the door. It's the price of safety in a threatened world. And it's classic. It's been going on as long as there have been people on the planet. Oh, and in New Jersey, liquor stores were deemed essential and will be allowed to remain open. In the Bible, the book of Revelation speaks of the pouring out of 7 bowls of divine wrath on the earth. A pouring out that results in horrific judgments on those who refuse to repent. Revelation chapter 16. There'll be no vaccines, there'll be no cures on that day. No intervention by the federal government, no way to escape other than running to the Lord for mercy and taking refuge under his wings. Have you noticed the ease at which Americans can be frightened over something because some people have the flu? Flu season 2018. From 9.8 to 11.4 million Americans had the flu. There were 113,000 to 136,000 hospitalizations. That flu season was the deadliest. 80,000 people died in this country. It's expected that last year's flu season, 2019, will come in as much lighter. January 2020 saw fewer hospitalizations than the year before, and the death rates are also lower. But then came Corona, a deadly new form of virus that was permitted to spread for 6 months before anybody told us about it. When we learned of that, several countries immediately banned mass gatherings such as sports, cultural, and religious events to combat the fast-spreading respiratory disease that has infected nearly 179,000 people around the world, killed more than 7,000, mostly in China. In Italy, another 349 people died just Monday last week, taking the total to 2,158, with nearly 28,000 cases, after 368 deaths were reported last Sunday, a daily toll more dire than even China was reporting at the peak of the outbreak. What's the difference? Not to minimize the threat of this new virus, but to put everything in perspective, consider that what we are watching is more stagecraft than it is actual threat. Again, not that the threat is at all minimal. It's not. Just that we are increasingly being jolted more by aggressive news outlets than by actual immediate threats. The 80,000 deaths last year didn't create this kind of stir. But this one's different. It's different for a lot of different reasons, not the least of which is that China had this problem for 6 months before they told anybody. In that 6 months, thousands of people moved in and out of China, carrying the disease with them. And we're being told that otherwise healthy Americans are not at high risk. It's the older people and people with compromised immune systems, people who are statistically unhealthy, are at serious risk. And who are these statistically unhealthy people? Well, the vast majority of folks in this country. You see, we've spent 50 years on junk food and takeout. We've ignored healthy guidelines like 8 hours sleep a day. We don't even require our children to have 8 hours sleep a day anymore. And the younger children used to sleep 10 hours a day in bed before it got dark in the summer. We don't do that anymore. And balanced meals? You know, the ones that actually have vitamins and minerals? We've abandoned the nuclear family. The one that lasts 30 to 50 years and produces healthy children and grandchildren. When you buy takeout that really tastes good, better than you can get at home, you have to know they've altered the recipe to include more sugar or other tasty non-food items. Food that is largely not food, meaning it doesn't contain the necessary vitamins and minerals we humans need to stay healthy. 21st century America is routinely overstimulated by all sorts of convenient media and other products we clearly don't need, and we are understimulated by common sense. Do you really think walking around with a mask on is going to keep you from getting sick while you're doing drugs? Like cigarettes, alcohol, sugar, they're all drugs. There's no food value in any of it. And the chemicals in them destroy your body. But do it slowly so that you don't notice. But now we have our mask. The spread of COVID-19 peaked in China in just a few weeks, but it was only after travel restrictions were imposed and testing dramatically increased on January 23rd that undocumented cases became more apparent. Professor Shaman said in his report, this flip in the ratios meant about 60% of the carriers were confirmed. But fast forward to now, when new daily cases have significantly dropped from thousands to tens. The study says, quote, radical increase in the identification and isolation of currently undocumented infections would be needed to fully control the novel coronavirus. And that's what we have now. And by the way, the Arab nations are helping to curb the spread of the coronavirus. Not. Israel is working overtime with Palestinians to curb and to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. The Arab states appear to be doing nothing, which is what they do best when it comes to helping their Palestinian brothers. The Israeli authorities have delivered 200 coronavirus testing kits to the Hamas-ruled Gaza Strip, despite the thousands of rockets and incendiary and bomb-carrying balloons that the ruling government, Hamas, has launched from there toward Israel. In addition, Israeli authorities have coordinated the transfer of 20 tons of disinfectant material from Israeli factories to the Palestinian health sector. The material included chlorine and hydrogen peroxide, used for disinfection, preservation of hygiene and sanitation. It's also worth noting that Egypt, which has a shared border with the Gaza Strip, did not send any test kits or disinfectant materials to their Palestinian brothers and sisters. Palestinians in Lebanon, meanwhile, are worried that the Lebanese authorities may use the coronavirus as an excuse to intensify restrictions even further on their refugee camps. A Lebanese politician and chairman of the Lebanese Forces, an anti-Palestinian Christian political party, has come under sharp criticism for calling for the immediate closure of 12 Palestinian refugee camps in his country. He said, quote, after more than 70 years, Lebanon remains the country where Palestinian refugees suffer the most. And still, as of January 2019, there were 475,075 Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. That, according to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees. People who do not enjoy several important rights, they pointed out. They cannot work in as many as 39 professions. They cannot own property. And because they are not formally citizens of another state, Palestinian refugees are unable to claim the same rights as other foreigners living and working in Lebanon. This is what these people do to their brothers and sisters. The conflict in Syria has forced many Palestinians from Syria to flee to Lebanon in search of safety. Nearly 29,000 of them are receiving UN relief assistance in the country, including cash assistance, education, health care, and protection. When the current virus crisis has passed, it is to be hoped that the Palestinians will remember that there was one country alone in their area that came to their rescue, and it was Israel. They might also remember that their Arab brothers betrayed them, not for the first time, and no doubt not for the last. It seems the general hatred of Israel by Arabs is rooted not in anything Israel has done to them, but simply because it's Israel, living, prospering in the land they, the Arabs and others, did not for over 1,000 years. Read Isaiah chapter 24, first 6 verses. In Israel, the Israeli Health Ministry announced Wednesday it has begun using mass surveillance tools to retrace the movements of coronavirus carriers and has already informed 400 people in contact with them that they must enter quarantine. Did you hear that? Mass surveillance tools that can retrace the movements of people. The electronic tracking program, which is being conducted by the Shin Bet Security Service for the ministry, has faced harsh criticism, including by members of the government, and its legality is currently being challenged in the High Court of Justice. And how are they tracking these people? Cell phones. Write it down. Check it off. We know where you are. We know who you are. We know who you talk to. We know what you like to play, the games you like to play. We know what you're ordering. We know all sorts of things about you. Anytime we want to know. A biblical attack has been unleashed in Africa and soon in the Middle East. A plague of locusts, the likes of which we have not seen for the last 30 years, is about to hit Africa and the Middle East. The irony here is that the plague is affecting travel of international experts and in-country gatherings for training to combat the locust threat. This from the Rome-based senior locust forecasting officer Keith Cressman. Cressman works at something called Locust Watch, a division of the UN's Food and Agricultural Organization, which gives emergency assistance to countries facing desert locust invasions and constantly monitors the status of potential infestations. According to the organization's most recent forecast report, there are new, extremely alarming swarms forming in the Horn of Africa. While one locust may not seem a major fresser, he says, that's Yiddish for eater, the swarms can grow to millions of individuals, quote, with the capacity to consume the same amount of food in one day as 35,000 people. One day. The current widespread breeding of locust in Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somalia represents what is being called an unprecedented threat to food security and livelihoods. and this at the beginning of the upcoming cropping season. In addition to this, another website is reporting that last week that desert locusts were spotted in Kenya 2 months ago. That swarm is considered to be the worst infestation in 70 years, according to the United Nations. These swarms are 3 times the size of New York City and California combined, estimated to be 192 billion, with a B, insects. And that's just one swarm spotted in eastern Kenya. These pests crossed the Gulf of Aden and arrived in Somalia and Ethiopia last year. They were spotted in Kenya about 2 months ago in what has become the worst infestation there in 70 years. The swarms are 3 times the size of New York and California, and the swarm the size of Manhattan can eat the same amount of food as everyone in New York and California can eat in a single day. Now there's another swarm off the Horn of Africa that I just told you about. That these two would come together and that they are able to reproduce exponentially, so that in favorable conditions like this, the population could multiply by 400 times every 6 months. Now, typically, the empty area, that's the area just devastated by locusts, would dry out and the population would largely dry off. But late in 2018, another cyclone hit in nearly the same spot, and the population exploded again. The population of locusts. Over the next 3 months, the insects started to migrate, some farther up on the Arabian Peninsula and some into nearby Yemen. From there, they eventually traveled across the Gulf into Ethiopia and Somalia. We don't have things like this over here. They deal with it all the time and have. You can read about it in the Bible. One of the plagues that visited Pharaoh in the days of Moses was locusts. God sent them. Here at home, Baltimore Mayor Jack Young, he's a Democrat, is telling residents to stop shooting people. I found that quite interesting, that a mayor would have to come out publicly and say, please stop shooting people. He's concerned about the number of hospital beds available to treat patients infected with the coronavirus. He said, I want to reiterate how completely unacceptable the level of violence is that we have seen recently. Apparently there is an acceptable level of violence. This isn't it. He went on to say, we will not stand for mass shootings and an increase in crime. We will stand for them and we will stand for crime, but not an increase, apparently. And those comments come a day after 7 people were shot on one night, Tuesday, and after the city reported its 5th confirmed case of coronavirus. He went on to say, for those of you who want to continue to shoot and kill people in the city, we're not going to tolerate it. We're going to come after you and we're going to get you. Can you hear the comments in the back? Maybe listen closely. Oh, yes. It's about time. Why does it take an emergence of this sort to get the chief executive officer of a major city to do his or her job? Not to put too fine a point on the subject, but have you noticed most of the more dangerous cities in America are governed by Democrats? Democrats are not known as law and order types. And the result is people die. And in the case of Baltimore, cities die. Have you been to Baltimore lately? And then this week there was some unexpected praise. for our president. Fox News is reporting, responding to a post by The Intercept's Lee Fang, who noted, Trump suspending mortgage foreclosures, demanding cash payments to Americans, now invoking the Defense Production Act to force private firms to produce needed supplies is incredible. Kind of a shell shock for anyone who reported on any economic policies in the Obama years. And then there was the ultra-left Minnesota Democrat Representative Ilhan Omar. She commented this week, unexpectedly, praising President Trump's handling of the coronavirus pandemic. She said it was, quote, incredible and the right response in this critical time, end of quote. How's that? From these staunch critics of the White House who have repeatedly drawn the ire of our president. She went on to quote Representative Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts, another Democrat, as saying, quote, unprecedented times require unprecedented leadership, end of quote. And finally, we should never let politics get in the way of good policy, Omar said. This is a great start, she said, and hope others will be part of a united front to push for good policies that will help us work through the economic anxiety the country is feeling right now. Oh, and extraordinary times demand extraordinary measures. In a rare bipartisan vote, the Democrat-led House has backed the USA Freedom Reauthorization Act of 2020. They did that this past Wednesday. It renews and updates domestic surveillance rules under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. They throw it around, they call it FISA. U.S. Senate agreed unanimously on Monday to extend a set of government surveillance tools that would have reauthorized and reformed a program passed by the House last week. The bill would allow lawmakers 77 days to consider broader changes to the divisive domestic eavesdropping program. Backers of the program consider an essential tool for intelligence agencies' efforts to fight terrorism, but it still faces too much opposition to pass the Senate without votes on amendments. 3 provisions of the FISA program expired on Sunday last week. Some senators backed a compromise that led to the temporary extension because it allowed them to immediately consider legislation. Legislation also passed by the House last week to assist Americans as they grapple with the effects of the coronavirus pandemic. House members are out of Washington on a week-long recess and not expected to return before March 24th. A senior Democrat House leadership aide said House leaders were discussing how to proceed. We watched some of that today. They're not proceeding very quickly, but we'll see how it all comes out. Stay tuned, literally.